a congressional visit here in May, the Faith and Politics Institute, and Representative Clyburn told a great story about when he was running for office. Some woman, sort of a grande dame of Charleston, who lived on the Battery, so one assumes, you know, she's a rich white lady. And she brought him in and she said, you know, something like, that's the problem, is that please be the one who talks about race, you know. And that's how he started this conversation, and many of actually the survivors from the Emanuel shooting and many of the family members were present, as was John Lewis. And but it was a really interesting story, and he kind of just brought it all home, that that's part of the problem, is that people don't talk about it.
But the systemic nature of it, I mean, it's so embedded and infused in society that we don't talk about it. I think one-on-one people get along pretty well.
Yeah.
I think so.
But how do you change that, Herb? I mean, Asia said it much better than I did. That was essentially what I was trying to ask, and I wish I just waited and let you ask the question. But how do we then take that message and change it and force the conversation?
Well, I think then you have to connect all these dots. Connect this dot in this conversation in this room with another similar conversation, with another similar conversation, and then you take it to people who are in positions to change policies, to open doors, to maybe change hearts, change minds. But it's going to be a long process. But it's to bring about, I think, a broader and a much larger and a louder collaboration and more sustained collaboration. That this, and then what you mentioned earlier, getting it into the textbooks so young kids can understand.
And also, I mean, you look, like if you look, what really needs to happen here, and you know, above and beyond a public transportation system, the city of Raleigh is a good example of a city that just said, you know, the only way we're going to solve this problem with unequal, you know, schools that are often segregated, you've got to redraw the lines. I mean, for example, Burke High School has got a lot of empty space, and yet they're building another public high school in Mount Pleasant. Well, you know, remember Adam Park? You got to do that everywhere. I mean, West Ashley is the most sort of naturally integrated schools and neighborhood. But you have to make a conscious decision as a community, because I mean, that changes everything. If the kids, you know, adults is a little, it's almost two different things. But it does change everything if the schools are more level in terms of resources, and if you redrew the lines, then you wouldn't have this problem. And it's all over the place. But you have to sort of collectively decide this is what is this is the priority.
But there's a test. There's a test to that, and it'd be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
With the new Philip Simmons schools in the Dandelion and King Hoy area.
Yeah.
They're very integrated schools, but how long will it? Because I tell people that, you know, Buse used to be elementary school, now it's Buse Academy. It wasn't Buse Academy, it was an all-black school, you know, when I was a kid there. Now it's Buse Academy, you know, and you see the composition of the school today. So it'll be interesting to see the new Philip Simmons schools, to see whether or not there's going to be white flight from those schools after a while.
Yeah, and like, what's been done about academic magnet?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a committee of people to try to deal with that issue when it, you know, and it's still, they know why there's such a, you know, small portion of minority students there. They know what they need to do, but they don't do it. So the will to change is, you know, and I mean, I think that this is the way human behavior is. You know, everybody came together and everyone did something, but then, you know, the systemic change is like, who's really on the front line? And there are people doing it, for sure. But it's who we vote for, and, you know.
Taking politics out of the schools.
Yeah.
I think we should continue this conversation informally.
This lady,
But I wanted to make sure, because I know some people do have to move on to other things.
But we all have to do something, get involved.
I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to
thank
our guests.
Thank you for reading our book. That means a lot.
But feel free to mingle informally.
This lady here had a question.
I am a product of Charleston school system, and I was gonna, during the discussion, I was thinking, okay, when I went to School of the Arts, but I grew up in Charleston National, which is right across from the new Wando. So I was,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
I'm thinking in my head, okay, so location of the new Wando determines, or the, what will be now the old Wando, where the new Wando is going where the old Wando
Right,
was.
yeah.
So-
I live right near there, so.
Right, so was the location of the new Wando that was farther out towards McCullougville, towards that rural population, when it was more of an integrated school like it is now, is that what pushed the need for the new Wando, or was it truly that there was just too many kids there? Or is it, what you're saying that's might happen
Yeah.
at Daniel Island School, is that what happened at the Wando school? Because I was also in real estate prior to coming back to graduate school, and that's a huge factor of people determining where they're gonna live and if they're gonna buy property is this.
Right, it's
this
kind of
is
like a vicious circle.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
and
I mean, I know the new one, and I used to teach at School of the Arts, so. I know the new Wando, the one that they, was it, how many years ago? It's not that new, 10 years ago?
like 12,
Yeah, was already too small for the population. I mean, Mount Pleasant is one of the fastest growing towns in the country. So, you know, that legitimately, wasn't big enough. But, you know, again, you know, I think all of the schools, the real estate and the prices and the gentrification, it's all linked together. And I don't know as much about the Daniel Island King White thing.
No, it's new, it's very new.
Yeah,
Yeah, just opened, the school term.
You know,
But it's,
so I don't really know how to answer that question.
I don't think anybody will know until time bears it out. I mean, because we've seen what's happened elsewhere in Charleston County, in schools. When you did have the magnet school over at Buist, not Buist, I'm sorry, Burb.
Yeah, well,
And it was
yeah,
pushed
Academic
out.
Magnet used to be at Burke.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it was
yeah.
pushed out, it was in that red building, it was pushed out, and it's just one of those sad commentaries on racial history of Charleston, that somehow we just can't get kids together. You know, and even in doing this book, when I was a kid growing up here, I didn't know that Millicent Brown and those 8 other kids were integrating rivers just a few blocks away from where I was going to school at C.A. Brown, when there used to be 2 high schools on the peninsula.
But they're from a different side of town and a different class background, right?
Yeah. So it's like a world away, you just didn't know. Because the newspaper covered it in a limited fashion, and I guess black parents are too afraid to talk about it because of whatever retribution that might have been handed out at the time if you stuck your head too far out of the foxhole.
So many of us aren't from here. I mean, I don't know how many in this room are, but I know I'm from Ohio, which, like, I mean, how many of us aren't anymore. When you look around, how does that change? You have people coming in, and the population's exploding, and the dynamic is changing. And people like myself, who were drafted to Charleston 2 years ago, who I've established the history, I've been learning it, I'm evolving with it, but I didn't grow up in it. But most of the people that I have met that have moved here have no knowledge whatsoever of any of this. How is that affecting the way we are as a community? Because some of the factors that we talk about are historic and systemic, but where does some transplant from New York fit in to that?
Well, we were
to that whole-
transplants from,
Yeah.
from other places.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the one thing that's interesting, if you look at the last elections, Charleston, it's kind of, I used to live in Brooklyn, and I used to always think, like, this has nothing to do with the rest of the state. Charleston voted Democrat. We've always had a Democrat mayor. And now, the more people who come from off, it does change the dynamic. I mean, you know, part of it's, I think in a way, the good thing is that there is this sort of, well, wait a minute, I want to send my kid to this school. You know, I know young couples moving in and getting involved with elementary schools that are, they're public school people. They're not going to send their kid to private school. They're going to work and help make the school better. So, you know, I see things like that happening. I mean, the history piece, you know, give it a couple more years. No, I mean, I think people, this is a city that people love passionately despite its problems. You know, it sort of becomes the way you feel about your family. You know, it's dysfunctional, but you don't just like it here. I mean, people move here because they want to be here, not for their jobs. I mean, I'd say that's pretty true all the way around. And people love it fiercely, and I think that's a little bit of how we came together in a certain way. It's also not that big. But I think it is changing the dynamic in terms of opportunity and, you know, better. I mean, I know that Borders Bookstore never opened here. I know this because I know people high up there. Because the education, the level of education here was so low in terms of how many people had graduate degrees. Did you know? That's a true story. I think now if Borders was, they'd open up a store here. You know what I'm saying? So it's changing the makeup of the population. But if you want to find out,
attitudes of the people, like people coming in who have not historically been immersed, like private schools to me seem to be a product of the South, an opportunity for people to separate themselves in a different way.
yeah, a
They
lot
don't
of
have to
them
go
were
to
created just
but-
for that reason, you know?
coming from an Ohio upbringing, that was, you know, private schools were for the very, very wealthy, but it wasn't a way to separate ourselves from others in the way that I see that historically having happened in the South. So as we move into this area, how does that look to change that? I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm
Yeah, well, you know, I mean,
muddying the
there's-
waters.
Yeah, I think on certain fronts, just as Marjorie mentioned, on certain political fronts, you've got an element of, let's just call it liberalism, that's introduced from other places.
From off.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I've seen folk come here from Michigan, and they very quickly adopt a Confederate veneer,
Yes.
you know, and they come here
Yeah, that happens.
and they're
Yeah,
gung ho, you
I've seen that.
know,
I've seen that.
Hundley, and
Oh, God.
shed tears over the gray uniform, the boys that wore the gray uniforms and so on. That's one element. And then, of course, on the other hand, you know, now I'm from Chicago, and so I'm a Midwestern guy. But, you know, when I think of what it was like to live in Chicago neighborhoods, which are fiercely segregated on the basis of race, you know. So those people who come here, and I'm sure there are places in Ohio, the same, Cleveland, for example, come here.
I know.
They bring those racist attitudes with them here to Charleston, you know. So there are some things that happen because of the outside infusions that are positive, but on the other hand, there are those that come in and there are elements here that reinforce.
The negative.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah, so.
Yeah, so we're in the middle of it. It's a very transitional
Yeah.
time right now.
Yeah.
The growth, don't you think? I mean,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
The Charleston markets itself as moonlighted magnolias.
Yes.
oh, yeah.
As years, yeah, and that's why they're the biggest advertiser in Travel and Leisure magazine.
Yeah.
That's the marketing, and that people are attracted not only as tourists, and people come here for a weekend and buy a house
Yeah.
because
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
they're
It's
the
crazy.
Smith of the
Yeah.
lost cause.
Yeah. Oh,
So that
yeah.
we're still
Well, you would, it's a kind of mythology. There's actually an interesting book. You might know what it's called.
Stephanie Ewell.
I
a
don't-
golden haze of memory.
Oh,
Yeah, and it talks about how the city made a conscious decision. Is that it?
Yes.
CAR
Yeah.
presentation.
And
America's most historic.
to kind of
city.
look at history, I started reading it, and it's really interesting, because it kind of, you know, it was a decision that was made. This is what we can do to make some
We'll be
money.
reading that later in the semester.
Oh, okay. Well, it's
Wow.
really, it's well written too. I mean, I got it at like the library sale or something. But it shows you, and it's interesting. I just wrote an essay for something, and I talked about, because I was raised in a Jewish community, but people talked about the Holocaust. You know, it was like part of, you know, you talked about it. It was around you everywhere. And then I moved here, And when I moved here in '89, and, you know, a lot's changed in terms of just the conversation and the knowledge of the history of slavery. You know, even then, you could go through a plantation tour, and they'd say, oh, we treated them so well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
The
that was still going on.
The servants.
You know, that was going on, I mean, the New York Times, remember that, did a big story on that? So that was still going, and I can remember, you know, we moved from Brooklyn, looking, the real estate, well, you don't wanna look in that neighborhood, it's a black neighborhood. My husband's like, okay, let's stop the car right now, you know, like, what are you kidding me? But I think that, you know, there's some changes, but these kinds of changes take a long time. I mean, I think we're gonna look back, I mean, what's interesting, and I think you'd say this with the African American Museum, with Ken Burns coming down, with Henry Louis Gates, and the more money being raised. I mean, I think that what happened here has put a spotlight on these issues and hopefully accelerated some of the work, you know, is that the word, you know, kind of turned up the heat, like, wow, you know, I mean, this kid was from South Carolina. So I think it kind of just hopefully pushed us ahead a little bit faster than we, in terms of solving some of these. Does that make sense?
But it seems like people were so easy to forget or to leave it after they held hands on the bridge.
No,
You know, that
that's
there's also
definitely
a
true.
desire to
Yeah.
say, we've done the healing, we've
Yeah.
held
Well, that's
hands and
just human
decided we're
behavior.
united,
You know, that's,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah,
human
yeah,
behavior,
yeah.
you know, I mean, that's
Yeah,
harder,
that's right.
that's a harder
That's
right.
intractable.
That's right, that's right.
I've been
What-
a downer, I'm sorry.
No, but no, you're right, I mean,
But, yeah.
you know, and even with all the things that happened last year, you see the same people over and over again.
Yeah,
Who were, you know, and you're thinking, where's everybody else?
yeah,
They're-
exactly.
Yeah, well, you know, it's like now, we've been through 2 terms of Barack Obama. But look at where we are.
Yeah.
Look at where we are right now. And actually, I mean, there are so many things that happened to him. So many things that happened to him. And, you know,